My name's Abbey Davis. I'm with the Easton Center for Career Readiness at the Spear School of Business, and today I have the pleasure of interviewing a very special guest with us, social psychologist and best-selling author Dr. Amy Cuddy. Amy, thank you so much for being with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yes, this is a wonderful opportunity for our students, and I'd just like to ask you a few questions
Sure.
about some of your work and how it relates to some of the things that we're talking about in class.
Okay, great.
So just to start off, do you mind telling our students a little bit about yourself, and then also your book, Presence, which is bringing your boldest self to your biggest challenges?
Sure. Yeah, so I grew up in a rural part of Pennsylvania.
Okay.
It was not a place where people expected to go to college, and only a third of my high school class went to college. I was the only person to go out of state, went to the University of Colorado, where I worked as a roller skating waitress to put myself through school.
Oh my goodness.
So, and then I had this, very serious head injury in my second year of college, and a lot of things that made me feel very out of place. I felt like everyone else felt that they deserved to be there, but I somehow didn't. And, that was a real challenge for me. So there were all these sort of setbacks that made me feel, I would say, quite powerless and unable to really fully be present and to be as effective as I wanted to be. I also kind of kept my head down and didn't take risks because I thought putting myself out there was a dangerous thing to do. So, eventually I ended up at Princeton with my graduate advisor, Susan Fisk, who's wonderful. And, I still feel like it was a crapshoot for her, but she took me. And I kept my head down. I worked really hard, but I didn't want to put myself out there, meaning I didn't want to be in public giving talks. I was sort of afraid to meet people, afraid of being found out.
Okay.
And eventually, then I end up at Harvard Business School, which is the place that you would not expect a person like me to end up,
or at least
I would not expect a person like me to end up. And someone says to me before the first class I teach, they're sharks, and don't bleed, because if they smell blood in the water, they'll come in for the kill. And so that was the day before I taught my first class, and I decided rather than go in that way, afraid of them, I was going to do something different that fit my orientation as a person and my belief system better, which was I would trust them. I would go in trusting that they all wanted to get something out of this course, that they wanted me to do well, because if I did well, they did well. And that really allowed me to be present with them and to connect with them. So instead of going in and seeing them as sharks, I saw them as allies. And, from that experience, I really became more interested in this idea of being present with other people and how that allows you to not only be yourself, but connect with them, create a conduit of influence. And then from there, I started noticing these differences in body language between male and female students, and wondering if that difference in body language was affecting the way they were behaving. And that's how I got into studying, powerful and powerless posture and the effect on how we feel and think and behave.
And it's helped millions of people and inspired millions of people across the world. And I'd love for you to hit on more, you talk about that imposter, right?
Yeah.
And imposter syndrome. Can you describe for our students what is imposter syndrome? And we have a lot of first-generation students here at Oklahoma State, so I think this is something that they could possibly experience. So do you mind speaking to that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. It's funny, Pauline Clance, who coined the term imposter syndrome, actually says, now, I interviewed her a few years ago, she says, I wish I had called it the imposter experience, because syndrome suggests that it's pathological, and she said it's so far from pathological. Everyone feels it at some point. Almost everyone feels it. Estimates are 75 to 85% of people have this experience at some point. So it is the feeling that you don't deserve to be there, that you are a fraud and you're going to be found out, and that everyone else deserves to be there, but somehow you were a mistake. You were an admissions mistake. Someone overlooked something about you that they should have seen. And the other thing that I think is important about it, first, no, almost everyone feels it, right? So you're not special. You're not an imposter. Everyone feels like an imposter. At Harvard Business School, the estimate is 75 to 85% of students feel like imposters, right?
Wow.
The second piece is that it's not exclusively a women's problem. It's been made out to be a women's problem, and that also is not true. So going back to Pauline Clance, who originally studied imposter syndrome, she was teaching at Oberlin College, and which is co-ed, but she had a lot of women coming in and telling her that they felt like imposters and they didn't want to do an honors thesis or they didn't want to take these risks. So she originally, doing qualitative research, thought that it was a more common among women. When she started doing anonymous surveys, she found men reporting it at the same level. So it was that women were more comfortable sharing that they felt like imposters, which is interesting. I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? I mean, on the one hand, women are allowed to disclose. On the other hand, they then feel like they're the only ones feeling that way. And then men are going around not feeling that they can talk about it. So my son, who's 16, would probably be a lot less comfortable, even growing up in my household. He's still surrounded by a certain culture, saying that he feels like an imposter. So I think it's really important to know that it's incredibly common. And I think the best advice is whenever you face a new challenge, you're going to feel a little bit of it. It's totally normal. The author Neil Gaiman, who I interviewed, and who is a friend of mine, and I interviewed in the book, and is one of the famous men who's not afraid to say that he feels imposter syndrome. And has 20 plus best-selling books, said that still on every new project in the beginning he feels like an imposter, but he knows that he's going to get over it. Yeah. So rather than being paralyzed by it, he pushes through it. Recognize it, let it wash over you, walk through it.
Just being mindful that I'm going to experience this, and how do I power through it?
I often tell people that the problem is not being anxious, it's being anxious about being anxious, right? That's the problem. Everyone's anxious sometimes.
Yes.
But when we get anxious about being anxious, that's what paralyzes us.
What creates issues.
That's right.
So you also talk about powerlessness, and how sometimes we think the opposite of that is power. But you challenge that a little bit in saying, with the concept of presence. Can you speak to that presence, and also how does that tie into authenticity? I think a lot of our students are going through that phase in their life where they're just trying to figure themselves out.
Yeah.
And so how can that help tie into helping them make them feel more powerful?
Well, I mean, I think I wouldn't exactly say that power is not the opposite of powerlessness, but it's a different kind of power. It's personal power. It's not power over others. It's not control of resources. It is the power to bring your best self forward. And that kind of power activates the approach system. It makes people more open to experiences. They're less nervous about what other people think of them. So they're not focusing so much on what others think of them. They're able to actually be in the moment. They're more creative. They generally approach the world as a place that's filled with opportunities instead of threats. So challenges are opportunities, not threats. And that allows people to be present. So if they're not worried about all of these things that might be out to get them, they're able to be present. And when we're present, we are bringing our authentic selves forward. So my favorite quote about power is Robert Caro, Lyndon Johnson's biographer, and who just came out with another book, and he was asked once, does power corrupt? And he said, power does not necessarily corrupt, but power always reveals. And I think that's the key. When you feel powerful, you're able to reveal who you are.
Absolutely.
And so there's nothing about power that should be innately scary. Power only corrupts when it interacts with other factors, and we're really talking more about power over other people. But allow yourself to feel powerful, make peace with the idea of it, as Jeff Pfeffer says, and that allows you to be present in these moments. I mean, don't consent to feeling powerless. It's not helping anyone.
No.
It's really, you're not able to help others if you feel powerless. In fact, people are less likely to step up in a bystander situation and be brave if they feel powerless, right? The more powerful you feel, the more likely you are to act on behalf of yourself and others.
And one person's presence is going to be different from someone else's.
That's
and
right.
how they show up, and
Exactly.
that's okay.
Exactly.
Because that's who we are.
It's you want to show up as yourself, not as sort of a knockoff of someone else who you think is charismatic. That just doesn't work. People who are charismatic because they are absolutely believing in what they say. They believe themselves, they trust themselves, so you can't pretend to be someone else. You can only be yourself.
It's almost an outcome, right, of fully embracing who you are.
That is it. Like the only person you can be is yourself because everyone else is taken.
There you go. That's very good. So we hear from a lot of our students sometimes that environments like career fairs and interviews, it's intimidating. And I have students say, I'm an introvert. And so, what advice would you have for them, especially those students that, feel like those environments are so intimidating? What would you say to them?
Well, at first, it's funny. My TED Talk came out a few months after Susan Cain's TED Talk. Susan Cain wrote Quiet, which is the famous book on introverts that really has changed the world for introverts. And for some reason, and I kind of think there's a little bit of sexism here where they're like, she's the brunette and Amy's the blonde, and she's talking about shy people and Amy's talking about powerful people. So there were all these sort of stereotypes. They were like, they must disagree. So people would sort of try to start these Twitter wars between us, which we never engaged in. We had never met each other, but finally did at a conference that year and just fell instantly in love.
Aww.
And so we're best friends and we spend all of our vacations together. They're family to us now. And the funny thing is that we've always felt that our messages are totally complementary. I mean, hers is very much about embracing who you are, that being an introvert does not make you powerless. At all. I mean, and it's funny that somehow our culture conflated those things, but in fact, our ideas are that when you are able to feel powerful, you're more at peace with whoever you are. If you're an introvert, you're more at peace with that, and the strengths that come with being an introvert. So there's nothing about being an introvert that should actually take you out of the running for any job.
Absolutely.
It does not mean you don't deserve to be there. Read Quiet, if you haven't already. Notice all of the strengths that introverts bring to workplaces, and tap into those before you go into those meetings so you can talk about them as well. But feel powerful enough to be the introvert that you are.
Be the introvert, embrace it, because a lot of times the best ideas, the best creativity, the best innovation is coming from those people.
That's right. That's right.
So I have a favor to ask. I've been working on my own personal power pose, and I wanted to see if you might be interested in demonstrating it for my students with me.
Sure.
Okay, great. So we're going to stand up. And we're going to start in just the traditional Wonder Woman power pose. And so we'll stay here, but then we're going to transition and do a Go Pokes.
Go Pokes.
All right. Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Thank you. This was wonderful.
You're welcome.